Welcome back. It's clearly far too early for me to do a power rankings, but here we are. So the first power rankings of the year are highly subjective, right? There's some basis in what happened last season and what the expectations are for this season. So the records aren't as important, especially when you consider strength of schedule being not really a thing yet because we don't know. And yet, number 32, off to an 0-2 start. I have confidence that having Arizona at number 32 will upset no one. For the Coyotes, they lose their first two games. They allow 12 goals. Vamelka, you're in for a lot of shots this year, my friend. It's going to be a busy year for him. For the Coyotes, of course, the expectation is they probably finish last overall. But they're going to have some competition. Off to an 0-4 start are the San Jose Sharks. So that's two Western teams for people following along at home. The San Jose Sharks, of course, a rough start to the year for them. First off, winless overseas, and then come back and they're winless in their first two games since coming back. But they have not chanted yet to fire their coach. There hasn't been a firing chant because their coach just got hired. But at number 30, we have a coach who can't claim that there wasn't a chant for him to be fired, and that's New Jersey coach Lindy Ruff. So the New Jersey Devils are number 30, off to an 0-2 start, back-to-back 5-2 losses. And I understand the fans' frustration. I don't know how close we are to seeing an actual change behind the bench. It just feels insane. We're not even a full week into the season, and, well, it might be time to fire a coach. But I understand New Jersey fans were calling for it last year and in the offseason, and they changed things with the assistant coaches, but they didn't make a change in terms of who's actually calling the shots behind the bench. Number 29, they weren't supposed to be here. Columbus. Columbus was supposed to be much higher than 29th, and they were much higher than 29th on this board the last time I did this, showing that, yeah, it's a rough start. They're 0-3 to start the season. Goudreau doesn't look the same in Columbus. We knew this would happen. We didn't expect him to get 115 points, but it's been alarming how quiet things have been. And again, I know it's a new team. It takes a while for some players to get adjusted, but Columbus needs everybody to get adjusted quickly before they dig themselves into a mess that with how tough the Metro is, they might not be able to dig their way out of. Number 28, off to a 1-2 start. They won tonight, and that's Chicago, but they beat San Jose. So before we get into, hey, maybe Chicago's got a chance, we'll have to see how they do against other teams. And based on the previous two games before tonight, the prospects aren't fantastic for the Chicago Blackhawks. So yeah, for Chicago, and yes, I've pulled out the magnets the magnets. I'm so used to magnets, the pucks that have all the mascots on them, because that's a fun set to use to start the season. I think I used that to start the season last year. So, and I don't have all 32. I only have 30 because only 31 teams have mascots. And of course, the newest mascot I don't have a puck for, because that'd be crazy if I had one already, wouldn't it? Number 27, a 1-2 start to the season for them, Montreal. So it got off to a really fun start, right? And then the back-to-back games they just experienced, not as much fun. And when you're playing against Metro teams, that can happen. Montreal, of course, expected not to be that great this year. And I would say the results from tonight and then last night show you, yeah, one goal over two games. Could be more indicative of what we're going to see from Montreal this year. Also in the bottom row, although they're 1-1, at 26th, Anaheim. The loss against the Islanders tonight was of such a scope that I said, I can't really bust them out of the bottom row. I can't. That was a tough loss, and it's something that you really can't have if you're the Ducks at this point. They need to get off to a good start. 1-1 is 500, but they need to get off to a pretty raucous start to the season. Speaking of which, at 0-2, not supposed to be in the bottom row, but here they are, is Vancouver. So there are times of the year where I'm accused of having Vancouver too high on the board or too low. This might be one of those times people say, considering they blew multi-goal leads in both games, they should probably be lower, but I have a hard time putting them below any of the other teams on this board. We often do see at the start of the season some teams look really bad, some teams look fantastic, and then it tends to even out a little bit as the season goes along. There will definitely be teams that are in this bottom row that don't stay here for long. But it's quite a way to start the season. Vancouver blowing two multi-goal leads and allowing shorthanded goals. They need to go get Dickinson. He's a fantastic penalty killer for Chicago. Just a fantastic debut for him tonight. Number 24, also not supposed to be this low on the board, Ottawa. So for the Ottawa Senators, yeah, I have Spartacat with the other logo. I know the 3D logo and people don't like it. I still do. One of the few, of course. But yeah, Ottawa was supposed to be just better to start the season, and they've had back-to-back setbacks. First against the Buffalo Sabres and now against Toronto. I mean, it's not that they got embarrassed or blown out in these games, but yeah, they're losses, and I can't reward them and move them up when they don't look like they're that great to start the season. Again, the expectations are up with them. DJ Smith may be on the hot seat a little bit if things don't get better. Number 23 on the board with a 1-2 start to the season. They won tonight, but it wasn't pretty. So it was kind of like Bailey's hair there, right, where it's kind of all over the place. Yeah, it's been an off start to the season for the LA Kings. Now, who knows? Maybe the win tonight over Minnesota, maybe that'll start springboarding them ahead of some other teams. Maybe they'll build on that going into their upcoming games. We shall see. But for now, I have LA at 23rd on the board. Would love to have had them higher, but those first two losses, I felt like 23rd was a good spot for them. Number 22, they got their first win tonight. They're now 1-2 on the season, and that's the Washington Capitals. The Capitals are an older team. They have not looked fantastic in their first three games, although, as I said, they beat Montreal tonight. They looked very good in parts of that game. So we'll see what the overall picture is at the end of the season for them. But right now, I would say there's a 50-50 chance of them being a playoff team at the end of the year. That obviously will change as the season goes along. And despite them being 1-2 to start the season, I'm still saying, yeah, they'll probably still get about 98 points. So I'm not overly panicked. Number 21, and one of the teams I do not have a puck for that has a mascot on it. They're off to a 1-1 start, and that's Seattle. The loss against Vegas tonight, it felt like that kind of takes the air out of their tires. That was their home opener. So a team last year that was okay at home, not very good on the road. Well, they had a decent road trip of 2 games, and then they came home, and it was kind of a stinker against Vegas. Now, they eventually woke up and made it a little bit closer, but for Seattle, they still don't look like they're going to be a playoff team, but it is still very early. So I have them at 21 on the board. Number 20, off to a 2-0 start, but the 2 teams they've beaten are low on this board, so Philadelphia. Now, if you're a Flyers fan and you see them at 20th, you're like, wow, that seems a lot higher than we should have been. And it's a lot higher than they were before the season started. Before the season started, I had the Philadelphia Flyers at 29th. So, yeah, for Philadelphia, they've had a decent start. They've looked good. They had a good start against Vancouver. The impressive thing to me about Philadelphia was that they fell behind 2-0, never changed their game, didn't panic, came back and won the game. So from a Canucks perspective, from a fan's perspective, it's great. We choked away the game, but from a Flyers fan's perspective, it's they stuck to their game plan. They didn't panic. Carter Hart allowed maybe a goal there that he shouldn't have in the first, but in the end, he wins the game and he came up really big late with some saves. So there's some good news for Philly. Number 19, with a 1-1 record so far this year, the New York Islanders. New York Islanders, there is the chance they're a playoff team if they play like they did tonight. Yeah, they could end up being a playoff team after all. A lot of goals, and with Lane Lambert, I was wondering if that was going to be a feature, if they were going to start scoring more goals. They need that. The New York Islanders, very good defensively. We know their goaltending is very good. They just need more goals. They got that tonight. We'll see if they keep that up. If they do, they'll be in the top 2 rows next week. Number 18, a 1-1 start for them, and that's the Buffalo Sabres. Buffalo Sabres, decent start to the season. They did beat Ottawa, and then they lost today, so it's a 50-50 split for them. But you'll take that if you're Buffalo. If this team ends up being above 500 this year, I think you take that. I mean, you'd love to have playoffs if you're the Sabres, but while you'd love to have playoffs, just a team that's respectable and in the hunt, playing games that matter in February, maybe late February, that's an improvement over where they've been over recent years. Number 17, off to an 0-2 start, Minnesota. So Minnesota, before the season started, I had them in the top row. So that's how much of an adjustment there's already been to Minnesota, because I have some concerns about the goaltending. Now, I was willing to say, you know what, we could see a huge bounce-back season for Fleury, but the numbers early on have been mediocre, and it's something that Guerin's going to want to jump on if it continues, I'll say for another 2 weeks. If 2 weeks from now, the goaltending numbers are still bad, something's going to have to give somewhere. Number 16, off to a 1-0 start. They've only got the one game played. Winnipeg. Winnipeg looked good in that one game. It was a win. So I figure leave them smack dab in the middle, and we'll see where they're at next week, right? So 7 days from now, a lot of these teams will have played 3 or 4 more games. We'll have a better idea where they're at. And so Winnipeg, I'll leave them right in the middle there. Number 15, 2-0. They won last night. They won tonight. And that's Detroit. So Detroit jumps into the top half of the board. They spent time in the top half of the board last year at the start of the season and in the first half. And then they faded after that. Some of that was by design at the deadline, of course. But yeah, for Detroit, they look good. We'll see if that continues. Beating Montreal and New Jersey, again, these are teams that are down in this part of the board. It's faint praise, but still they won the games, right? These are games that 4 years ago Detroit would have found a way to lose, and they found a way to win them over the last 24 hours, right? So, moving on from Detroit, number 14 on the board, off to a up and down start, Nashville. They won their first 2 against San Jose. They lost their last 2 against Dallas. So I'm going to leave Nashville right about here because they've looked both good and bad in their first 4 games. Again, we'll get a better feel for where they're at over the next 7 days, especially over the next 2 weeks. But yeah, for Nashville, I think 14th is a good spot for them right now. They're a team that were around the middle for a lot of last season. I remember, too, there was some controversy when I had them down in this part of the board for a good stretch last season, too. So we'll see where they end up overall over the next couple. Number 13, 2-0 start to the season. I have some mild optimism when it comes to Boston. That being said, they beat Washington, who didn't look like they were keeping up with Boston very well. And then they almost blew it against Arizona. They made me nervous against Arizona. And I was thinking, if Boston loses to Arizona, if they'd lost that game, I could not have them ahead of Philly. So I would say if they had lost that game tonight and found a way to blow it, they would have been 20th on this board. So they don't end up 20th. They end up 13th, but we'll see how, and that's just how volatile this board can be early in the season. So don't be surprised when there's big moves a week from now. Number 12. They're 1-2 to start the season, but I still think they're going to be fine, and that's Tampa. Tonight was a rough one for them against Pittsburgh. It felt like Pittsburgh was more motivated than they were at points. It was a close game until the third, and then Pittsburgh kind of blew their doors out. So we'll see with Tampa. I don't have any concern with a slow start for Tampa. They've had slow starts in recent years. It hasn't been that out of character for them to have a little bit of a slow start. So I'm not worried. But yeah, so keeping them at 12th, even though they're 1-2, might upset some because I know people will look at the records and go, well, this isn't fair. This team's ahead of... Look, teams have only played a few games. So this is really an approximation at this point in the season. Number 11, with a 3-0 start to the season, they look pretty good. That's Vegas. So Vegas has won games they should, right? I'm anxious to see them against the Oilers, against the Flames. Based on early results, Vegas, Calgary, and Edmonton. Those may very well be the top 3 teams in the division. And yeah, I think that could be a fun 3-way race for the top if that's how it turns out. But again, it's very early, but it already looks like Vegas is going to be in the hunt. They blew the doors off Seattle tonight. 5-2 was the final. Seattle scored a couple to make it look a little closer than what it really was. But yeah, anytime they got a good opportunity, it went in the net, which might reflect on the goaltending for Seattle, but that's a whole other discussion for a whole other time. So we're into the top 10, right? Number 10 with a 2-0 start to the season, Dallas. Now they beat Nashville twice, so my optimism's a little bit guarded because they've only beaten one team, but they did beat them twice, and they looked really good tonight. Robertson back in the lineup. Ottinger had a very good game. I almost said very good season. Season's over, everybody. Good night. But yeah, Ottinger had a very good game. Everybody that you want to produce for Dallas has in these 2 games. Pavelski's been good. Hintz, Robertson, that 3-person line, that's been very good. Marchman has provided them with some good scoring. Wyatt Johnston doesn't look out of place. If you're a Dallas fan and you're kind of excited, I'm kind of there too, but don't tell anybody. All right, number 9. They are also 2-0 to start the season. Never doubt the Penguins. Just don't. If you're of the mind that, well, this is the year Pittsburgh's going to miss the playoffs, I think you're going to be disappointed. I think the Pittsburgh Penguins are going to be a playoff team. I think that's a given, and so we'll see how far they go should they get there. But I think making it to the playoffs, I think, yeah, they'll get there. Crosby looks fantastic early in the season. Gensel's scoring goals. Letang looks good. Their goaltending has been sound through the first couple of games. All they need to do is keep that up, and Crosby's really, really reliable. So now we're into the top row, and this is the teams that should be seen as contenders. Number 8, they won tonight. It's their first game of the season, so we don't have a lot to go on with St. Louis. But we know that the Blues should be motivated this year as well, in that this could be the final year for O'Reilly with the team. He's in a contract year. And as we saw with Perron, you can just say, well, he'll stay in St. Louis. Doesn't necessarily mean they do. So for St. Louis, good start to the season with the win over Columbus. Columbus, of course, being down in this area, but St. Louis was in the top row to start the season anyway, so I don't see any reason to drop them. Number 7 on the board with a 2-1 start to the season. They haven't been fantastic, but they've been good when they've needed to be, and that's Toronto. Now, Matt Murray being out could be concerning, right? But they called up Shalgren, and there's a little bit of cap space there. There's word that Nick Robertson could get called up, and that could be huge for their attack. Toronto 2-1 on the season. The one loss being against Montreal. You look where Montreal's at, and that's part of the reason why Toronto's where they are on the board. They haven't really played their game yet, but they're 2-1. So the good news for Toronto fans is they haven't really had that really big, great game yet, and yet they're 2-1. So once they get really rolling, and I know they had a good game against Washington, but I know how good they can be, and so I think they'll start to roll at some point soon. Number 6, 1-1 on the season, so they've only played twice, but I don't expect the Oilers to fail and flail at any point. It was a good game tonight. The one problem the Oilers have had in their first 2 games is starting on time. So against Vancouver and then against Calgary, they didn't start on time. They ended up behind the 8 ball with both of those games. They came back and beat Vancouver, in part because Vancouver was nice enough to allow it. They almost came back and beat Calgary, but Calgary was not as charitable as the Vancouver Canucks. That's the reason Vancouver's down here. Whereas Calgary finds themselves 5th on the board. Calgary beats Colorado, and then they beat Edmonton, and so they end up number 5. Now, before the season started, I had them 9th on the board, so they've definitely moved up, and over the next couple of weeks, if they end up playing as well as they have their first couple of games, they'll likely end up 1st, or maybe 2nd, because there's a team that's number 1 on the board this week that, they may very well have another very good regular season. But Calgary ends up number 5, so that's 3 Canadian teams in a row on the board. The highest rated Canadian team is the Calgary Flames. Number 4 with a 2-1 start to the season, and I said last night that for the power rankings, I would not bust them down because of that loss against Winnipeg, and that's the New York Rangers. For the New York Rangers, they look excellent to start the season. Panarin looks absolutely fantastic. It looks like they're off to the start of that. This could be a really good year for the Rangers, basically. They don't have a mascot, thus not having a mascot puck. I still say if you have a guy dressed up as the Statue of Liberty, probably smoking a cigarette, just something like that. Yeah, I'm Statue of Liberty. Go Rangers. I think it could work, but they don't have a mascot, so that's the way that works. But they don't need one, do they? They're number 4 on the board. They've had a very good start to the season. Again, the loss last night that they suffered against Winnipeg, I kind of cast that to the side and said, yeah, that happened. It's the second half of back-to-back. It was Halak in net. It wasn't just Durkin. And so there you go. Number 3 on the board, 2-1 to start, or 2-0 to start the season, I should say, Carolina. So for the Carolina Hurricanes, basically exactly where we expect them to be. We may see Carolina and the Rangers fighting it out for first in the division all season as we did last year. And I'm here for it. I think that would be great if that was in fact the case. But Carolina gets off to the start that was expected of them. They look pretty good, and their attack is pretty good. I do hope they get more goals this year. I hope they allow their offense to grow. This is a team that can score 4.5 goals a game. I'm not asking Brindamore to loosen up the reins that much, but let him go out there and have some fun, get a little bit creative. And I think you'd see Svechnikov's goal totals go up if he really had the reins kind of taken off him a little bit out there. Number 2, 1-1 to start the season, Colorado. Not panicking over a 1-1 start. Colorado, the game against Calgary was a game that Calgary came out and won. Great game for the Flames there. But for Colorado, while they haven't looked like Colorado yet, the reality is that, you have a Chicago game to start the season. Then you play against Calgary. And you don't play your game necessarily. I'm not worried with Colorado, the defending Stanley Cup champions. But the fact they're not number 1 the first week is kind of noteworthy. So who knocks them out of first place? Well, Florida. The Florida Panthers. And what's remarkable is they're 2-0 to start the season. And they looked okay. So for Florida, they've looked all right. Good. Superstar, stellar, looking like Stanley Cup champions? Nope. But they've looked good. And so to me, the Florida Panthers at this stage, number one on the board. And we'll see how things develop with this board from here for the rest of October. And then we go on into November and beyond. But there you go. Your first power rankings of the 2022-2023 season. 1 through 32. All set. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, as I know everybody will. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through, you just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.